Hello, I'm Bert Bronius, and this presentation is entitled Reformation Era Educational Contributions. Do you ever wonder where many of today's educational values originated? Or are you curious about how we got universal education, civic responsibility for schools, and curriculum content for general education and church education? This presentation aims to answer such questions by summarizing the contributions of selected educators during the Protestant Reformation era in Europe. For our purposes, this period began in 1517 with Martin Luther's 95 Theses. It ended in 1648 with the Peace of Westphalia, the resolution of the Protestant and Catholic 30-Year War. A timeline will illustrate important events and individuals of this period, as well as a few related events before and after it. The Protestant Reformation was a religious revolution that took place in the Church in Western Europe in the 16th century and beyond. It was in response to claimed abuses in the Roman Catholic Church. The Reformation became the basis for the founding of Protestantism and had far-reaching religious, political, economic, social, and educational effects. Some of the marks or the beliefs that are associated with the Reformation are referred to as the 5 solas. In the following slides, we will identify the solas and survey selected educators and characteristics of the Reformation era with an emphasis on education. The 5 solas, or foundational educational or theological principles, are sola scriptura, sola fide, sola gratia, sola Christo, and sola de gloria, which means that the Reformers believed that life should be lived by Scripture, through faith alone, by grace alone, through Christ alone, and to the glory of God alone. This timeline will trace selected aspects of the Reformation. Note that some of the names are in italics. I have done this throughout the presentation and will only be reading those italicized words just for the sake of convenience. You, as a listener, are welcome to go back and read the entire slides in more detail. So our emphasis for this presentation will be on Martin Luther, Huldrych Zwingli, Ignatius of Loyola, and we'll place him last just simply because I'm grouping Protestant reformers together, Philip Melanchthon, John Calvin, and John Amos Comenius. Let's begin with the context of the late Middle Ages. This was a transitory time period for education in the 14th and 15th centuries. Education was handled in various ways, usually with an emphasis on those who had the financial resources to develop it. At the bottom of the paragraph, historians suggest that for 1 out of 5 men and 1 out of 20 women who could read, and even fewer who could write. The emergence of the Protestant Reformation resulted in new religious, political, and social structures, including that of education. The following slides identify selected theological leaders and their associated educational reforms. This information is based primarily on the book, The Protestant Reformations. In general, the common threads associating with reformers include the following: biblical and theological education grounded in the Reformation, distinctives, universal education for everyone, regardless of gender or social class, and teaching in the vernacular language rather than in Latin. And finally, church and civil authorities sharing responsibility for schooling. So we'll begin with Martin Luther, a German pastor, theologian, reformer, and the one who posted the 95 Theses that we remember on Reformation Day. Luther aimed to make quality liberal arts and theological training widely available to both sexes through standardized state-run school systems with teaching in the vernacular. Here are some of his characteristics. Universal education for all children, regardless of gender or social status. He taught at the University of Wittenberg, and that became a center of theology as well as education. His time included emphasizing biblical exegesis, studies in the original languages, and teaching and learning in the German vernacular. Luther joined the university faculty in 1512, and Philip Melanchthon, his close colleague and educator, in 1518. The curriculum included the 7 liberal arts, as well as biblical and theological studies. Additional contributions from Martin Luther was the writing of catechisms and translation of scripture. He wrote the Small and Large Catechism. These were written in 1529, and he translated the Latin New Testament into German in 1522 and the entire Bible in 1534. Luther is known for a radical approach to church music because he believed in singing songs that the people knew and was in their language with their style of music. So he wrote 37 hymns in the vernacular. It is said that some of these were put to pub-style music. They were in a singable, musical style. One of his most well-known songs is "A Mighty Fortress is Our God." He encouraged congregational singing and developed the first hymnal called Spiritual Songs, written in 1524. Next is Zwingli, a Swiss pastor and theologian. Zwingli's theological reforms were not as broad as that of Luther or Calvin, yet he significantly influenced Protestant education in the Swiss regions. His contributions are: education should be for all children. There should be an emphasis on theological and biblical studies, in addition to studying the classic literature in Greek and Latin. And his writing included a short Christian introduction, as well as The Shepherd, which was a dialogue for teaching Reformed doctrine and theology. Next is Philip Melanchthon, who we identified earlier as a colleague of Luther and a key educational figure. He developed a comprehensive educational system for Protestant schools in what today is known as Eastern Germany. This plan covered elementary through university education. He, with Luther, was a professor at University of Wittenberg and provided schools that were grounded in both religious and classical learning. Melanchthon developed Protestant educational theory to such a degree that he was highly respected and given the title of Teacher of Germany. He wrote many educational and theological textbooks. Some of the most noteworthy of them are his book called Common Places for Theological Matters, or Common Topics for Theological Matters, as well as early presentations of systematic theology. In a sense, for both the structure of schools and the way in which religious education was organized, he was the person to develop those systems. Next, we move to John Calvin, who established Protestant education in Geneva, Switzerland, that was based on Reformed theological principles. He is known for developing the academy at Geneva and putting its structure in place. He also established a classical liberal arts foundation for teaching the trivium and the quadrivium along with theological and biblical studies. Calvin provided instruction in the vernacular rather than just Latin, as well as provided training in biblical education. He wrote catechisms for teaching Reformed doctrine to children, church members, and new followers, especially the Geneva Catechism and the Catechism for the Church of Geneva. He is well known for the Institutes of Christian Religion, the Golden Book of the True Christian Life, and for many commentaries, his first being a commentary on Romans in 1539. The final Protestant reformer we're surveying is John Amos Comenius, who is perhaps the most well-known educator and has made the most significant contributions building on the other reformers. He was an educator, a theologian in the Moravian Brethren Church, and is referred to by Jean Piaget as the father of modern developmental approaches to education. He was a professor of education and theology and was commissioned by the Swedish government as well as the British Parliament to design their educational systems. He also influenced educational reform in Hungary. Comenius emphasized the importance of education for all, regardless of social status or gender, and he advocated for teaching methods that were respectful of children's developmental stages and interests. The best known works or major works of John Amos Comedian are The Gate of Languages Unlocked, his book on language learning, The Great Didactic, which is a book on educational theory and reform, and The Visible World in Pictures, which was the first book for children that taught knowledge and language through the use of pictures. He's considered, therefore, the father of developmental, experiential, and inclusive approaches to teaching and learning. Well, those are the reformers we're surveying. We have one more, but these reformers contributed to the transformation of educational systems in Europe by promoting literacy, religious education, and the establishment of universal education for all, and these things are foundational for teaching and learning standards and practices as we know them today. Finally, associated with this same time period was Ignatius of Loyola with the Roman Catholic Counter-Reformation movement and the Jesuits. He was founder of the Society of Jesus, or Jesuits, which had a significant impact on Catholic education during the Counter-Reformation. His principles guided the Catholic Church in providing education that emphasized teaching Catholic doctrine. It emphasized moral training, spiritual disciplines, and classical learning. Ignatius established a network of Jesuit colleges and universities across Europe with universal guidelines for their organization and curriculum. He is also known for developing spiritual disciplines and practices that are at the foundation of Catholic life and education today, and many of these remain as contributions to Protestant churches. And several of these are his writings on spiritual exercises, which are meditations and prayers and mental exercises, contemplation and meditation, and that is contemplation on Scripture with prayer and imagination, and obedience and humility, and spiritual direction. The spiritual direction work is what has led to the establishment of spiritual directors and mentors in the Catholic Church, but also in many Protestant congregations. So this has been a survey of the Protestant Reformation and how it has led to significant educational reforms. These were initiated by key theological leaders such as Luther, Zwingli, Melanchthon, Calvin, and Comenius, and they established universal education. They focused on biblical and theological learning as well as classical learning and emphasized teaching in the vernacular, development of catechisms and educational materials, and they established education with shared oversight by not just the church, but by church and civil authorities. The Catholic Church also responded to these reformers with the movement called the Jesuits, led by Ignatius Loyola, that promoted Catholic doctrine, moral training, spiritual disciplines, and classical learning in Jesuit colleges and universities. So we have surveyed Protestant and Catholic contributions which have become the foundation to much of what we know of as general education, Christian education, and church education. Please take time to look over the slides in more detail, and you can find out more by checking the references which are provided under this slide called Resources. And I invite you to benefit as I have from the knowledge of this foundational work in history and the blessings it has brought to our teaching as educators.